Happy Sunday, guys, and welcome back in. And this week, we're talking about active weather, coast to coast, couple systems to keep an eye on. On the East Coast, we have something that may become tropical. You can actually see that sort of on the edge of your screen there. And on the West Coast, well, it's going to be a train of basically low-pressure systems sweeping through the Pacific Northwest, cutting up through the Rockies, going into the plains. Could be some storms out there. And all around, our weather pattern, while it has been very benign, changing this week. So let's take a look at what's ahead and get you prepared for the third full week of September. The upper levels this week tell all the story, so we're going to start there. And I want you to keep an eye on two features. One, we have this ridge out here, but you're going to see this low pressure system begin to erode it a bit. And on the western part of the country, you have this trough out here. You're going to see a couple different bubbles, we'll call them in there, a couple different storm systems cut through as we head through the week. So we're moving this into Monday and Tuesday here, and you can see one of those bubbles on the west coast cutting into the, really the entire mountain west and even the coastline out there. On the east, you have that first site of a low pressure system beginning to erode that ridge away. Now watch as these continue to develop over time. Here we are now on Tuesday and Wednesday. There's our second low cutting through the west, and now we have an upper low pressure system here, which is going to really stir things up. Even if we don't get a tropical cyclone, which we'll talk about ahead here, that upper low is going to keep things a bit busier on the east. Moving through the rest of the week, you're still seeing those bubbles on the west coast. You have that ridge completely eroded on the east. Meanwhile, in the central U.S., you have a bit of a ridge here. That's going to create some anomalous weather through the central part of the country. And all around, you can see the jet stream all over the place here. And that's what's going to create such an active weather pattern. And we're going to break down how it impacts multiple different areas here. But we're going to start by taking a look at where the rain is going to be falling. And we're going to move over to our surface map for that. We're going to start with our American model here, and you're probably noticing two things in particular. One, the system out here, and we're going to talk a lot more about that coming up, but I want to get to the west coast first. And what you're going to notice are some areas of rainfall that are especially prevalent in the mountains. Those are sort of the byproduct of those bubbles we saw on the upper level map. It's just helping to destabilize the atmosphere. And in fact, some of those mountains may even see snow with how cold that upper level air is. But let's take a look at what happens as we go through the week. Again, focus more on the west and the plains, and what you're seeing here, especially right off the bat Monday, is the chance for actually some storms to develop up across the plains. There's a low chance for severe weather out there, and it wouldn't shock me if we even have some isolated large hail in portions of the Great Basin into the into like Idaho, Montana. Those areas could certainly see some inclement weather as it stays relatively unstable. Mountains could even see some snow out there too. Move it forward into Tuesday, and what you're seeing is a similar story. You have that rain out there, some perhaps snow in the mountains, some storms across the plains once again, especially as we look across the Dakotas into Nebraska. Now, I don't see any high-end severe potential here, but certainly could be some wind and hail mixed in. We're continuing to see that active weather on the west coast. You have that cyclone pretty well defined over Montana here. Perhaps a little bit of a break late week, but I still expect the chance for storms to be present across portions of the the upper Midwest out there. And even at this point, while it is calming down a bit, there is still going to be a little bit of energy still in some of those northern mountainous areas. And you can actually see some of the blue contours there. That's some snow trying to sneak into the mountains. So that's sort of your week here. This is the weekend now. You can see a lot of that begins to shift into the plains here. So if you're, even the Midwest on the weekend, if you have plans, out here is where that more active weather is focused. But still, clearly an active picture painted there. That's the American model. We'll go quick to the European model. Again, just a quick gloss over things. You'll see something very similar. There's your rain in the mountains, some snow out there too, your storms, which will be most present on Monday. Really across the high terrain in the plains, not mountains, but I'm talking about more the front range rather. Tuesday, Wednesday, you have that cyclone over Montana. Still a chance for some rain or snow mixed in over the mountains late week. Still a chance for storms in the northern Midwest in the late week. And on the weekend, that's going to be more so the central U.S. Again, you can see, we'll have to watch and see if this cyclone actually develops. It might be anomalous here, but still, it'll be more active in that part of the country. So that's what we're looking at in terms of your rain and storms. Again, nothing significant in terms of severe weather, but there could be some mixed in there. We can also take a look at temperatures, which are going to fluctuate a lot. And I do want to jump to our temperature anomalies. So let's take a look at what's ahead in terms of what you're going to feel outside. So we're starting here on Monday, and what you're noticing is much of the country is actually pretty mild. Remember, we still have that ridge in place, so that really anything that's east of the Rockies should be pretty warm. A little cooler on the coastline out here. That's because of our storm system, again, which we'll get into in a moment. But notice how much colder it is out here on the west coast. We're talking about highs that are going to be as much as 20 degrees below average. And those could push some record low high temperatures in areas. That's your Monday. On Tuesday, we'll move this forward. Still very warm in the plains and in the Northeast, but that western portion of the country, basically anyone west of the Rockies here, it's cold. Those are temperatures, again, that are going to be largely 10 to 20 degrees below average. So again, pushing some record low high temperatures. You can see especially some of the mountainous areas are going to be well below average, and that's where you have the best chance for colder than average temps and perhaps some records. We're moving into Wednesday. Still a lot of warmth in the central part of the U.S., but the warmth across the Northeast begins to get eroded as that storm system migrates northwards. The western U.S. still pretty cold out here, and it's going to stay that way for pretty much the entire week as we saw that trough digging in. Moving into Thursday, not a lot of change. Still warm in the central, still cold in the west, becoming more average on the East Coast. Here we are Friday. Central still warm. Northeast trying to get warm again. Just depends on how quickly that system gets out of here, and we're still pretty cool out on the west, especially if you're in sort of the Great Basin out there. That's where the temperature is going to be coldest. Saturday and Sunday, this upcoming weekend, we're still pretty warm in the central part of the U.S. It does begin to abate some of that cold out here on the western half of the U.S., but still, you're not getting any taste of summer. It's going to be fall-like. And Sunday, as a whole, our temperatures are going to be warm still across the central, beginning to lean a little bit farther east, but nothing as significant in terms of temperature anomalies as we get later into the week. So certainly a range out there. Now we can also take a look at our actual temperatures, which we'll go over quickly. And what I'm looking at here for highs largely as we head into the start of the week, as you can tell, we're going to be more mild in the central part of the country. A lot of 80s and 90s spread out from Texas up through most of the Midwest here. Meanwhile, we're looking at some temperatures that are much closer to the 60s if we look farther towards the west coast here. And on the east coast, we're still sitting around 80 degrees, which is pretty nice for this time of year. We'll move this forward more, and what we're going to be talking about as we head into, of course, Tuesday and Wednesday and the rest of the week are high temperatures that are going to be largely in the 80s, still in the central U.S., but you're seeing some 50s and 60s depending on how high the terrain is that you're in on the west coast. This is Tuesday, moving into Wednesday. Still seeing 50s and 60s in the west. On the east, we're seeing those temperatures begin to cool back down. Highs largely in the 70s. We get late to the week here. Still the 80s and 90s, central part of the country, more like 70s on the east coast, and still pretty cool out there in the west. We'll actually see high temperatures a little better right here, but what you're getting is perhaps some 80s in the valley. That's in California, but any high terrain, we're talking about 60s for the most part here and some 50s in the mountains, even 40s at night, and 30s are cold enough for snow and some of the highest elevations. Late week here, your highs still very warm in Texas. You can see that across the central U.S., cooler in the northeast and still cool in the west, though we're beginning to recover a bit. The valleys could be back into the mid-80s by the time we get to Friday, and especially the weekend, going to be much warmer on the west coast. East coast, we're pretty much average, and not even by much. Could even be slipping a little bit below average, as you can see here. This is Saturday in the northeast. We're talking about highs that may be stuck in the 60s, so more fall-like taste for much of New England and the Northeast, whereas we're still warm in the central U.S., the South Central, and we're beginning to recover on the West Coast too. But the mountains, regardless, are going to remain cold out there. Sunday, more of the same, cooler in the Northeast, reasonable in the Southeast, about average, warm in the Central, and much cooler as we look towards the Northwest, especially the North Central here. We're talking about highs, again, that may be in the 50s and 60s, and that's even 60s on some of the flat terrain. So, a pretty active start to the week. It's going to impact temperatures. There's going to be rain. There will be some storms and a low chance for severe weather in some spots. But that's your west and central. We have active weather in the east, and it all begins with a potential tropical system. Let's take a look at how that's going to develop. Now, over on the East Coast, we're all keeping an eye on the potential for a tropical cyclone to develop. If it gets a name, it would be Helene. But honestly, it doesn't matter so much here whether it becomes a tropical cyclone or not. It is going to have an impact across much of the East Coast. And the upper level component in its own right will cause some inclement weather. But we can take a look at this, and what you're noticing is a 50% chance from the National Hurricane Center for development on Monday or Tuesday. That's sort of its window of time to develop before it sort of just meanders onto shore here somewhere in the Carolinas. You can see some of the tops here on our satellite. It's a decently organized system. It's just a matter of whether it can gain those tropical properties. But I want to go back to our upper level map because that was very telling in terms of what we might see in its development, but it's not just about how it develops. Once more, I want to focus on the fact that the upper level low is a big piece of this. So it may be tropical for a short time and then quickly lose its warm core characteristics, which basically means this upper level low, that yellow bubble you're seeing, takes over. And that's going to be a key player here because you're going to see it really begin to widen and overtake much of the eastern U.S., and that's going to create some instability just in general. Better, for just some kind of organized showers across much of the East Coast through the later portion of the week. And it really erodes this, what otherwise would have been a pretty nice ridge, and instead replaces what is warm air with some cooler temperatures out there. So let's take a look at the precip again, and we're going to get an idea of when that rain may fall and, who may see a good amount of it. So we'll start the European model here, and what you're seeing again is that rain offshore beginning to come onshore here on Monday, Tuesdays when the center of that storm may drift onshore, but a lot of rain's possible in the Carolinas here per the European model. We're moving this into Wednesday now, and what you're going to see is, again, that rain it becomes more broad as the upper level component, it becomes more of a wave than closed off, but still showers are possible across much of the East Coast. This is through Wednesday and now Thursday. One of the bigger questions is how far north it's going to get. We'll get into New England, and right now you can see it kind of capped off. We actually have a high pressure system, which is largely going to keep things dry for this portion of the East Coast, at least on this run of the Euro. But not all guidance is suggesting that. In fact, I do think it may be more likely than not that this tries to get into the Northeast. And I'll show you what the American model is saying right now. And once again, you're seeing a similar picture. This puts it on shore a bit quicker here. Monday, that rain takes over the Carolinas. You can see the center of the low is on land, likely loses its tropical characteristics pretty quick in this scenario too. Tuesday, you see that precip riding up the coast. Wednesday and Thursday, that precip begins to get into New England. Now, in this scenario, still high pressure is winning across a good chunk of the Northeast. We're kind of cutting it off, and that's a really fat H there, but you get what I'm getting at. And in this case, again, we may see rain across portions of southern New England, but it might not be a big deal for northern New England. One of the questions in this scenario, though, is how long does it meander off the coast? And with that upper level low just sort of hanging around, you can actually see the American model spitting out a second round of showers out here. It's a very real possibility, but regardless of how this plays out, it is more likely to be a week with rain on at least 1 or 2 days across most of the East Coast, and it is going to be cooler because regardless, this system is going to erode that ridge. Once we get into the weekend, it is more likely that we see a drying pattern across the East Coast here. So your weekend plans likely not going to be rained out, but it is going to be a bit cooler. And actually, you can see pretty clearly here that we're cutting off northern New England. This entire sector here is dominated by this high pressure system. So heading into the weekend, much better on the East Coast. During the week, while most days will be dry, there is still likely to be some rain mixed in and clouds as well, along with a more fall-like feel. But I also want to take a look at the amount of rain that may fall. We're going to go to our blend of models here for this. I always feel that it gives you a good idea, kind of like an ensemble would, of how much precip you're going to get. I always find it reasonable, especially looking at the sort of 3 to 7 day range. But here's what we have on Monday, that rain really working its way into the Carolinas. There is a chance there could be some flooding, especially if this system does gain tropical characteristics. You might be able to have a more focused core and precip shield. So that would allow you to get more rain in the Carolinas. What we're seeing here is the potential, anywhere you're seeing that gold, the potential for 4 to 6 inches, perhaps on the North Carolina coastlines where you could get the most. Anyone shaded in red, you still have a good chance for some flooding. That's where you may get up to 2 inches of rain. And this is cumulative through the period, by the way. Here we are into the end of Tuesday, that rain reaching the Appalachian Mountains. Could be some flooding as that rain begins to slope up the higher terrain. This is at the end of Wednesday. You can see it becoming more broad. End of Thursday, we're talking about precip that's going to be on the order of perhaps 1 to 3 inches across a good chunk of North Carolina into the southern mid-Atlantic, and then Pennsylvania, southern New England, upstate New York. That's where you're seeing lesser amounts. Forecast is generally around a half inch or less out there, unless you're right on the south coastline of southern New England or in Jersey. But as a whole this week, the best chance if we're going to see flooding, of course, is going to be right here, especially closer to the coastline of North Carolina, and perhaps right along the apps out here where you're going to get some enhanced precip. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like anything significant in terms of rain. A good rainfall for some of the coastal areas all around here, but nothing crazy out there. So that's what we're keeping an eye on this week. And again, that's largely going to impact the middle and, later days of the work week. The weekend is when things begin to improve. So with that, that kind of covers our big stories, but a little treat in here. Let's take a look at fall foliage real quick before we wrap things up, because it's getting to that time of year and colors are actually beginning to pop in some spots now. So here's a look at our fall foliage map as of today. This is September 15th. Again, it's Sunday. And what we're noticing, this just came up this week, is perhaps some low color across the higher terrain in the Northeast. So, that's northern New England, the Adirondacks, places like that. We also may be seeing a little bit of color across the far northern U.S. And, if you're in the Rockies, of course, you're getting some out there too. So a little bit in the Pacific Northwest. But as you can see, about a week ago, we really weren't talking about anything. In fact, I can move this back to a week ago. Here we are, September 8th. That's a totally green map. So in this past week, perhaps some colors beginning to show up. And over the course of the next week, that's when we're going to begin to see some of those highest mountains showing peak color. That's mainly in the Rockies. But in New England, too, where we get a lot of very vibrant colors, we're talking about the potential for some more moderate color in the northern portions of the region. So still a ways out from peak color in the U.S., but we're getting our first taste this week, and that's exciting and something that we'll talk more about. Specifically, we'll have a couple videos just on that coming up here, too. So with that, we'll wrap things up this week. Again, we are beginning to see our first taste of fall, so wherever you are, keep an eye out for those first signs, especially if you're in the Rockies or farther west. It's going to be cool this week, so some of those higher terrain areas could see those first colors pop. I mean, there could be some snow in some of those mountains. On the East Coast, stay dry. Keep an eye out, especially if you're in the Carolinas, for that system. And if you're in the central U.S., I'm jealous because you get a little more summer out there. This week going to be nice and warm before, of course, things inevitably cool off quickly. And we're getting into that time of year where on a week-to-week basis, temperatures fall the fastest between mid-September and mid-October. Mid-November, I should say. So things changing quickly, but take the changes in stride, enjoy them, and perhaps enjoy the last of summer if you're like me and love the summer weather. We'll see you here next week. Every Sunday, we got a video on the week ahead. So hopefully you're prepared. And like I said, enjoy.